Well, welcome back, everybody, to Theology Thursdays. Again, I am Reverend Landon Adams, Director for Maturity at the New Salem Baptist Church in Columbus, Ohio. We've got back with us this week our pastor, Dr. Keith A. Troy, as our guest. You remember we started with him just a few weeks ago in this series, looking at why theology is important, what theology is really in general, but particularly why it's important to the local church. This is a recording, so we're not sure when you might see this, but to mark time, we are in the first week of June in 2020, and to say that we are under a bit of civil unrest is probably putting it mildly. We continue to see police brutality in our community, particularly against the hands of Black and brown men and women. There is a lot of protesting going on across the country, and particularly right here in our own city. So we wanted to bring Pastor Troy on to sort of talk about, both from a theological perspective, how do we put the context of what our lives are, what we're experiencing, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're thinking and feeling, and lay that against our scriptures, our foundations of faith and theology. And then how does that motivate us? How do we sort through this that we might be faithful Christians, faithful believers, and really hold up the mantle of what God is calling us to do. So, Pastor, it's good to have you back on the, I guess we can call this a program.
Yeah, good morning. I am happy to be back. Let my New Salem family know how much I miss them in person. This is a substitute, but it is not the real thing for being able to engage. So we look forward to when we will be able to do in-person things, but let all of our folks know just how much me and the Lady Troy miss them and look forward to being with them in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get right into it. As I'm sure conversations you have been in, conversations I and others, people and particularly members are asking, how do you make sense of this stuff? Am I supposed to go to a protest? Should I donate money to something? Should I just be quiet? Like, what are we supposed to do? How do we make sense of this? Could you first talk about, for you, almost like you did in that first time you were with us, about your own upbringing experience, right? You are a pastor's kid. Papi Troy was very active in the community, as much as he was in the church as a pastor. You attended Morehouse within that decade after Dr. King was assassinated. So can you talk to us about some of your early shapings, both in the church and in ministry, about how the church has things to say and do and understand kind of what happens, particularly to Black folks in the world?
Yeah, it's been interesting for me because of the lens I look at all of this through. As you have said, coming out of high school in 1972 and going to Morehouse that fall and being the first African-American male from my hometown to go to Morehouse. Matter of fact, I had played football and all those kinds of things. And when it came time to look at possible scholarships, I remember going to my coach and saying, I don't really want to do that anymore. I plan on going to Morehouse College. And his immediate response, he said, you mean Morehead in Kentucky? And I had to kind of smile because I'm like, his only reference was football or sports. Yeah. And I had to give him an early education at 18 years of age, where my Morehouse was, the fact it was the alma mater of Martin Luther King and several other great leaders, and that my days on the football field were done, and really wanted to explore other advantages of life. I will say to you that that experience was life-changing for me, coming from Northeast Ohio and being put in that environment. One of my classmates and close friends, both at Morehouse and at Colgate Rochester Crozier, was Derek Barber King, who is the son of A.D. King, who is the brother of Martin Luther King. And so Derek and I have developed a relationship now some almost 40 plus years. So to be able to really have firsthand conversations and dialogue with a member of the King family, them being at King's alma mater, it just makes a difference in how you see the world. Probably the most impactful statement for me at Morehouse happened one day when Benjamin Elijah Mays came to chapel. back in those days, Morehouse, and they still do have a chapel service. And I remember Dr. May speaking to us about Morehouse holds a crown above your head. And he wanted us to make sure that we looked across the street when we left Sale Hall Chapel, because across the street from Morehouse is and was John Hope Homes. John Hope Homes is the oldest public housing in the United States of America. And what Dr. Mays was saying, if you don't take this education that you have and use it to benefit the folks who live in those public housing or projects to make them better and make their world better, then you really don't deserve to wear that crown. Landon, I have never forgotten that statement. No matter how blessed we've been or how privileged we've been or where we travel, our role is always to improve the environment where many of us have come from or allowed to serve. And so that kind of is what shapes me, and why you often hear me talking about put feet on our prayers, because it's one thing to be in the church. There's another thing to have the church in you and then see the community as an outgrowth of what we've all been called to do. And that's to go get it and bring it back. And I think oftentimes we have failed to really bring it back to our communities and try to make them better. So for me, I don't see that separation. Whatever the church is blessed to do, the community that we serve and those who are in the community ought to benefit by how God has blessed us and equipped us.
Yeah. As we think, I've heard the institution of the Black church kind of criticized as really the kind of child of slave religion in the U.S. I know, right, you being my pastor for a long time now, I know we were kind of raised and taught that Black folks in the U.S. in slavery got the best of Christianity and could hear the voice of God calling for people's liberation. And so the Black church is really rooted in the U.S. Almost as a redemption of what slave religion was. We saw, of course, in the civil rights movement, the Black church wasn't just involved in the civil rights. The Black church was really the home of the civil rights movement. And I know of today, a lot of people are kind of asking, where is the church? What's the Black church doing? Can you first talk about maybe underscoring that point of like civil rights movement and the movement of liberation in this country really is birthed out of the Black church? Like this is not something we chose to do. This is a part of our identity. Can you kind of talk about what that looks like and where we get that out of our faith?
Yeah, the whole concept of liberation theology literally says that you really can't be free from a slave mentality, that this God we have in us liberates us to ourselves and to the community as a whole, to walk in not a secondary position, but in a primary position. One of the things that always helps me when people say that to me, I always say to folks, then you've never been to the motherland. Because it's amazing how when you go to Africa and on that continent and the different countries I've been blessed to go in, the similarities between our worship here and our worship there. It did not get lost in the middle passage. It's amazing how much you feel at home and you see the carryover from what they do and have done to what we currently do and continue to do. For me, the liberation theology and my concept of this, it frees me up to follow as I see fit how God has called me and what to do. As I had a conversation with some folks earlier this week, the church at its worst is still the best thing we got going. It is the only institution that we own. It's the only institution with the major shareholders in. I said to one of my prominent Caucasian businessmen, I said, I'm the only guy sitting at the table who raises money and I don't buy and sell goods. Basically because the folk who worship at our congregations have a trust and faith in our leadership. And then we're able to take those resources and turn them back into the community, feed the community, send kids to school in the community, pay rent in the community, cover funerals. So when people ask me what is the church doing, it's doing what it's always done. But I think people have to understand, if you really study the civil rights movement, it just wasn't protesting. There were strategists like a Wyatt T. Walker. There were fundraisers. Everybody wasn't out on the front lines. There were people who were planning. There were people who were feeding. There were people who were funding. And so at some point, what I'm saying to people, find your lane, get in it, and run strong. Everybody doesn't have to be out front to be down for the movement, because a lot of folk were behind the scenes doing other things so that Martin and Abernathy and them could be out front. I think oftentimes we think because we don't see somebody, they're not involved. But ladies and gentlemen, if it hadn't been for a whole lot of folks who raised a whole lot of money to cover the cost of those trips and those things, we wouldn't be where we are. So everybody can do something. Just find your lane and stop apologizing because you're not taking a selfie down at the protest. Do your thing. Do what you do. If you're down there, keep doing that. But one of the things we have to be very careful of is trying to determine to what degree somebody's committed. We don't know what people are coming from or what their experience is, but everybody can do something. That's for real.
Yeah. I think that's the beauty of the church. And it's funny, I remember having a conversation about like church plants and new church starts. And I would always tell my friends, like, I'm kind of, maybe this is one way I'm like, I'm old and kind of stuck in my ways, but like my experience of church is that like everybody's in the church and it's something that is old. So there's old people, there's new babies, there are folks in their careers. And the thing that I love about that is that there's a role for everybody to play. And really our faith and our theology, even, as we've said, from a perspective of a liberation theology, there's, again, sometimes people are out on the front lines. Some people are in the meetings. Some people are paying the expenses, When I think about one of the strategies of the civil rights was also the imaging that came with the civil rights. And I think with the church, also the ways in which symbolism is important and meaningful for us. Now, right, as Baptists, our things are just signs and symbols, communion and baptism, they're not necessarily magical moments, but they're signs and symbols of what has happened. And that's important. And so I think when we think about what protest and demonstration is, it's an important part of the equation. One of the things I feel like is being a bit co-opted in these current conversations is this notion of peaceful protest. And what I keep hearing in the way in which, as we've talked about Dr. King, like his message kind of gets shifted a little bit, is that when people call for peaceful protest, what they mean is polite protest. And protest in and of itself is disruptive. Do you see that and hear that happening? Because sometimes I feel like the danger, even in our community or in a church community, when we call for peaceful protest, what we're really asking people is like, now just be nice with your disagreement. Can you talk about for believers, like what does it look to have holy aggravation, to be disrupting intentionally?
I think, and part of me struggles with this because sometimes when I hear people say that, how I hear it is passionless protest. You want me to have these quiet, educated conversations and leave my emotions out of it or my pain out of it. You want me to have conversations intellectually, but not bring my heart to the table. And I think when you've been through what we've been through for 400 years, I'll be honest with you, when the chief of police said enough, that didn't sit well with me, because you're talking about something that was 4 nights when we've been dealing with stuff for 400 years. And it almost was in a condescending tone to say, okay, we put up with this for enough. And the fact that these buildings and property are more important than people, I had to really wrestle with my response to that internally to say, you don't get to determine when enough is enough, because the reality is you don't know my pain. That's like telling somebody you've grieved enough. Well, how long is enough? I can't predict that for folks. So I think you've got to find your way of expression. For me, it needs to be productive. That doesn't mean that you can't be down in the protest expressing yourself how you need to express. My grandfather, and I often laugh, was not a churchgoer. And he said, there is a such thing as righteous anger. Now, this was coming from a man who didn't go to church. but don't let your anger stop with being angry. Let it produce something. So I think we have to take that energy and exercise this beyond our physical involvement, but economically, we've got to become as upset as we are. I think politically, we've got to, and don't forget, all this is about accountability. My wife and I have, for most of our lives, supported African-American business and minority businesses. That's not anything new from us. Coming from Atlanta, that's just how we do. But I also say to my African-American business folks, give me the same customer service. Not as other folk, but if your quality is excellent, then let your customer service be excellent. I realize what it takes that you don't get the same breaks that everybody else gets. Having my wife is her own vendor, as many folks know in terms of, so I know those, but it doesn't keep you from having a high standard of how you do those kinds of things and how you deliver service. Or if something doesn't come through, pick up the phone and let somebody know. So I think in all those realms, yes, I think we've got to, our indignation has to show itself where we support each other and stop depending on other folks to define how we do what we do.
That's right. Yeah, good. Can you talk about, in the sense of kind of evil in the world, again, as we think about our faith and this notion of God as good and the devil or whatever is evil, however we might name that. For me, the other thing we are seeing in this time is not just kind of systems that are set up against us, but we are really seeing, again, the face of just real pure evil. And I particularly think of it when, as you talked about, like supporting Black businesses or boycotting businesses that support things that don't support the community or just are, again, inherently against the community. But we just celebrated the anniversary of when the community in Tulsa got burned. That was one of the hallmarks of our MLK celebration this year. We kind of had a learn-in, if you will. And it struck me, particularly as the anniversary struck during this time, that even if the Black community were to be self-sufficient, there is a real evil of white supremacy that is not happy with anything that is successful and Black. And so how do we think about, as believers, also what this looks like to be fighting like an ancient evil? And how does our faith give us resources and tools to combat, the things that we might not be able to do well enough to get out of?
Yeah, I think, and Dr. Robert Smith has said this, and I think it sits well here. We have to remember that racism is sin. It's at the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, it's just sin. Now, you can't legislate sin, you can't politicize sin if there's not a conversion, if there's not a transformation, then, ladies and gentlemen, it will return to its nature. So while we are trying, and I believe we ought to put all the laws in place and all those, but until you change people's hearts and minds, racism is going to continue to be here in all of this manifestation. So I think to fight it on the economic level, the political level, and not address it from a God-fearing level, then we're never going to turn this thing around. Now, is there a possibility for everybody to be converted? Yes. But is that going to happen? I doubt it seriously in my lifetime. Yeah. So I remember one time my father saying to me, do not be surprised when people do wrong, but be surprised when people do right. So part of this whole thing is saying, if I understand your issue with me is your own inferiority or your own fear of me, because you have to understand what the nature of racism, you obviously are afraid of what I'm capable of being or doing. So you need to crush me before because there's no such thing as a level playing field. The field may be level, but you getting the ball on the 20-yard line from the field, from the touchdown, I'm getting it 80 yards away. And then you're saying, why aren't you scoring? Well, look at the distance. I didn't set up the rules. So part of this whole thing is understanding, and I think that's the church's mandate. While we want laws change and policy changes, all those things need to happen. But until you change a person's heart or you have that transformation, which was true for because all of us are sinners. But what happened to us to keep us from going back to what we used to do? That is a relationship with Jesus Christ, which then allows us to look at our brothers and sisters differently. And if we leave that out, then ladies and gentlemen, I don't think we got an answer.
What do we do? I know a lot of folks have been experiencing for them some unusual support from white people. Folks, either their friends, their colleagues, who have not really been engaged. We talk about this often in the church, that because of the historical racism that existed in the church, sometimes it is challenging for Black believers to engage in real partnerships and collaborations with white churches. Because the Black church didn't just decide they wanted to be the Black church.
No.
It was when Black folks no longer found a home in what was the American church. And so can you talk about the challenges and what strategies we might employ or things we'll do even for ourselves to think, how do I begin to engage with folks that I'm not usually engaging with, that I don't know that I trust, in terms of working with and having a place for allies in this work?
This is always a challenging moment for me because I have colleagues on both sides of this ledger in terms of those kinds of things. And what I try to say to my majority colleagues is if you're not having a conversation with folk in your congregation, then we're not really preaching the same gospel. I think at some point, the one who pastors the oppressor has to have the conversation with the oppressor.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't have that conversation. So it is amazing to me how quiet the religious right has been with all of the stuff that our current president has been doing and saying. And yet where are the same people who were upset when Colin kneeled because of the playing of the national anthem, but you're not upset when a man kills somebody kneeling? Interesting enough, that parallel there, not on the field, but on somebody's neck.
Yep.
And for my right to life folk, I struggle with that because I get all this calls and think about where are you on the right to life and all. I'm on the right to life from beginning to end, but you don't hear those same voices and passions. So it gets hard for me to understand the legitimacy of folks. And to my brothers and sisters, wherever you're sitting, if your pastor or church leadership is not dealing with this, then you need to be, because if they're not dealing with it, then do they see you? Do they see your pain? Because we don't have an option, because we deal with it every day. When people stop protesting and stop marching to the mayor's house in downtown, we still will be feeding folks, we still will be taking care, we'll still be doing what we've always done. And so my thing to folk is, it hasn't changed for us. We'll welcome all the other folk who will join the thing, but when it's no longer newsworthy, but folk are still in pain, the Black church's mandate doesn't change. And so I'm not comfortable with the kumbaya moments. I've done enough of those in my time of doing this. So for me, it's about trying to make a difference where we are. And I'm responsible for that.
I remember in college, we were at a student conference and Sister Soldier spoke. Mm-hmm. And she talked about being a college student during apartheid in South Africa. Mm-hmm. She said at some point we had to come to realize that lighting candles wasn't going to change nothing. And so, again, I think what people have called peaceful protest, they had to have some more disruptive policies. Mm-hmm. And she said, and then we call for our university to divest their resources in South African companies. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be one of the strategies too, where we bring our allies in. But I think religiously, like, where's the spirit of Rahab?
Yeah. I mean,
the people on the inside that can share information, like, this is how it works. This is how we dismantle this thing. And with the press conference the other day, you mentioned with Chief Quinlan, he talked about creating this council, the Chiefs Council, because we need to hear from the community and hear what we need to do. And my thought was like, you've heard that.
Yeah.
You have all the recommendations. Like, we don't need another meeting, commission, survey, or study. You need to do what you know to do. And so that also has been one of my questions back to folks outside of the Black community. Like, if you sit in positions of power, you tell me when you're ready to work.
Yeah.
And until you're ready to work, I can't believe any of this rhetoric.
Well, I think that's kind of where I am. I've heard this all of my life. And as you alluded to, you know, with Dad being as active as he was in the community and being the community person for the Buck Reinhardt administration. And I will tell you that he and I had many discussions about his role in that arena, but he helped me understand that sometimes sitting in the room and being in the meeting is necessary in order to make sure some things don't happen or that you can advocate. So I understand those roles in terms of, again, all of us have our roles. And I believe, I'm simply saying to folks, do what you do. If I'm rowing the boat, I don't have time to wreck the boat. So I don't have time to look around what everybody else is doing. I'm simply saying, here's what Keith Troy is prepared to do as a pastor of New Salem Church and an individual. I want to make a difference in the community where I serve because I believe strength respects strength. And so oftentimes when I'm going in those meetings, I'm not going in there with my hat in my hand asking them what they can do for us. Whatever I believe in, I try to help New Salem make sure that we can support it and we can stand on our own and not need somebody else to help fund our dreams. And I think that's what we got to get to.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about one of the things that is, I think, paramount in these times, wherever you fall in the spectrum of activity, really risking not just burnout, but just emotional distress that you can't get around. Right. There's no secret that we continue to be under a global pandemic. We were laughing before the interview that it's June and our normal schedules and cycles are sort of off. So we're not doing some of the activities that we normally do. And it's one thing to be grieved and have some stuff you're dealing with personally, but when Black trauma is on the news, when you're watching Black people get killed over and over again, and then you may work, in an environment that you're the only Black person on the staff in the company, and you've got to face it at work, you've got to face it at home, you got to face it on the news, and this also isn't necessarily just something that you see that's other people. Most of us have our experiences of bad interactions with the police or with folks in authority, people who just want to question your existence or identity, period. Can you talk both about how you balance that and or even share from your own perspective? I'm finding that it's interesting. People are surprised that most Black folks have had these negative experiences, or that this is just a part of our lives. Like I tell people, sure, I have great relationships with some police officers. We've got some folks on our own Columbus Police Department that grew up in New Salem. They come to our events, they participate, and we're excited and have encouraged that. But for me in my own life, as a general rule, I do not voluntarily engage with the police. That means I wouldn't ask the time of day. I wouldn't ask directions, because there's always a fear that the interaction could go left for no apparent reason. And then you are caught under an authority that is almost impossible to get out if it goes wrong. Again, can you just talk about how you manage that personally in the world and maybe share an experience you've had that as a pastor, you're not exempt from?
No, not at all. I think we all have to fight for that balance. And what I mean by that, you've got to create for you some me time, some time where you stop being co-defender of the universe and co-partnership with God and come away and say, you know what? Right now, I've got to spend some time with me, getting in touch with my emotions, getting in touch with the responsibilities I'm called to, you know, my wife is happy. I'm back working out consistently now because I realized physically this was taking a drain, both mentally and emotionally, all those kinds of things. So one of my ways of dealing with this is saying, okay, for at least an hour a day, you got to do you. Now, whatever that looks like, whatever, but at some point you got to release those stressors. Yeah, I've had some crying moments, some tearful moments when different things have come across the grandkids, you know, all of those kinds of things. But if you don't release it, it's going to explode. So during all of this time, I've set out some goals of things I want to improve in some other areas. They have nothing at all to do with being the pastor of the New Salem Missionary Baptist Church. There are other things I enjoy doing, I want to do, you know, even though I'm called the pastor, I'm more than that. And there's some other aspects of my life that just need to be developed and enjoyed. And I said to somebody, it's almost like God called a timeout in our lives and say, you need to reprioritize and you need to make a shift. You're too busy for yourself and for your own health. And let's get back to doing what can be productive and can help you in terms of those kinds of things. So I think part of that, I'm saying to everybody, I'm laughing now because I'm back to doing, I used to fight my grandmother about taking naps. It's a wonderful thing in the middle of the day to be able to lay down, because I don't sleep all night. I don't rest well most evenings because I'm tossing and turning or looking at stuff that's gotten into my system. But to say, bruh, your body's tired, give it a chance to relax and rest in terms of those kind of things. So I think part of that is saying you got to find out what is your pressure point that releases that for you. It may be walking around the neighborhood. Maybe your neighborhood's not safe, but find something that you can do that it's just you, where you're not thinking about how to solve all the problems in the universe. Yeah. What was the second part that you asked me about?
If there was an experience you've had, either whether it was interaction with the police or some kind of authority that, you know, again, people think like, oh, he doesn't know, you know, he's the pastor, he gets to just going through.
Yeah, given my nature, I probably could write a book about experiences. My wife caught one the other day. We were on our way to Atlanta, and there were 4 carloads of us traveling, and my oldest son, Andre, and Kendall and his cousin Armand were in a car, and they were in the lead car. I had always been taught that, you know, as the father figure, you bring up the back. So there were 4 cars. And one of the things we had made sure was to make sure we were doing the speed limit. So we were on 71 or 75, I forget which one. We weren't close enough that you could tell we were together, but all of a sudden a highway patrolman comes past, and I do what most Black men do. First thing you do is you look at the speedometer, and you automatically take your foot off the gas. And fortunately, I knew that we weren't speeding. I could still see my sons up in front, and I knew they couldn't be speeding because the distances hadn't changed. And much to my surprise, the police officer, the highway patrolman, pulled the first car over, which had Andre, Kendall, and Armand in the car. So what he didn't see happening, because he thought that car was by itself, and it was 3 young African Americans driving a fairly late model car. 3 other cars pulled over behind him. And I said to everybody else, y'all just stay in the car, let me see what's going on. Well, my father was with us. So obviously what I said didn't mean much to him. So as I was getting out, my father got out with me. And so I said, Dad, so we go to the highway. I said, sir, what's the issue? And he's like, well, why did y'all stop? I said, because those 3 young men, 2 of them my son and 1 of them my nephew. So all of a sudden there was a change in environment. There was a change in temperature. There was, because he didn't process that they weren't traveling by themselves. And so when we inquired, which was always an interesting response, he said, well, I thought there was something wrong with one of the tires. Now, how you can make that determination, and we're traveling at 62 miles an hour, that you can look at a car, maybe it can be done, but I just thought it was ironic that you cared enough about my sons to be worried about a tire. And so I remember he didn't write a ticket. You know, he said, well, y'all travel safe. But that, and what kept haunting me the rest of the trip, if they would not have been with us. Yeah. And even though they had been taught to drill, yes, sir, no, sir, keep your hands where it can be seen and all that, my mind couldn't help but wondering this could have went a whole different way. I will tell you the anger as a father, and it was interesting because even my father, who is normally somewhat mild in these kinds of things and is the voice of reason, we were quiet in the car probably for the next 30 or 40 miles before any of us could gather ourselves emotionally to have that. And we said, you know what? It's amazing. It is. Not only has my father dealt with it, I've dealt with it. Here are our sons and grandsons still dealing with this. Yeah. And that's part of what fuels me, what motivates me to look forward to a day when my grandchildren can live in a world, probably won't happen in my lifetime, where who they are doesn't get questioned simply because the color of their skin. And again, I go back to racism is sin. As long as there's sin in the world, we're going to be dealing with this. But the key is to prepare our young men and our young ladies to be able to handle this.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important what you just said, our young men and our young women.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I've got 3 daughters.
Yeah. And it is.
And one of them is militant as probably more so than her brothers. They shall remain nameless, but they know who they are.
We know.
Yeah, most folk know.
Yeah, but in a world that struggles with both racism and sexism, even in the work of civil rights, of fighting against police brutality, right? People are much easier and quicker to name George Floyd than Breonna Taylor.
Sure.
And, you know, again, sin is sin. And it also can, if we don't pay attention to it, it will give us a sense of false safety, and not understanding that that our sisters are in just as much danger as we are. And again, that it is evil and sin at the core about what our humanity is. And again, if we think about from the theological perspective, this being Theology Thursday, right? The humanity that each of us has, you know, the image of God that we are all made in, and our equality together, are called to lift up and to protect one another's, the sanctity of life, even as you said, is you know, the right to life. Yep, the right to come here and have life, and the right to stay here. You know, Jesus said, I have come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. Are we working that everybody can have some abundance in their life, or are we living and perpetuating a system where my success is built upon your failure or your service?
I smile about the female issue, and you know this as a father of daughters. And I have said this publicly. You know, I will do time about somebody bothering my daughters. You know, it's just a whole different response for me when it comes to any female that I'm responsible for being in danger or being mistreated, whatever else. Okay. There's just a different response from me, simply because as a father and as a male and as a son, you know, I always said to somebody, if you bother my dad, I'll get there. But if you bother my mother, I'm on my way. You know, it's just a whole different response in terms of that and how we walk with that. It's somehow with our daughters, it pulls on a different heartstring. Yeah. Yes, I had the conversation with both my sons and my daughters. It's a different conversation with my sons than it is with my daughters in terms of, but I think both sides of my children know if we can get to dad or dad can get to us, that's all that's got to happen. That's right. So, and I think we have a responsibility, regardless of whether they're male or female. Our children need to know that, hey, you can be wrong, but I'm still going to protect you, and then we'll deal with that. Yeah.
And protecting each other. The thing that we know is hard, particularly as Black men, you know, when we have our we have our closed door
Mm-hmm.
meetings and
Mm-hmm.
sessions. People always say like, well, you know, men don't really like to talk. And I'm like, well, you ain't never been to no men's group, have you?
No, right. Right. Yeah.
um, but it can be
It is
hard.
a barbershop conversation that happens without other folk being invited to it.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it can be hard to talk about like what happened to me. Um,
Mhm.
and I know we talked about this when we did the men's fraternity series, how as particularly men, as we get older and we assume more identities, you know, whether it be husband or
Mhm.
father or boss, whatever it is easy for us to minimize our own self and our own needs. Um, and I was struck the other day by a father similar to yourself to talk about the motivating factor being the protection of children, which again is
Mhm.
right and natural. But I could also hear how that kept him quiet about what was hard for him and his own life. And
Yeah.
I appreciate and think it's been important, and New Salem hasn't been involved in work around mental health and promoting that folks go to counseling. Like you said, again, Theology Thursday, part of our theological perspective in the world is that you have to take a Sabbath.
Yeah.
Jesus modeled it time and time again. I've got to go away and pray. I've got to take some time to myself. And in this work, it can be hard to say, like, I'm not just afraid of my sons being a victim of police brutality. Like, when I get up in the morning and just go to the grocery store to get my pickup of groceries, like, I'm not sure if somebody's going to think something's wrong with my tire.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
Even, you know, we can fall under, you know, what is really the kind of like, you know, just be good, you know,
Yeah.
rest right, you know, don't sag, don't use slang, don't do this. But what we realize, when sin is sin, you might run into the person who doesn't like your cultural performance, but you also might run into somebody who doesn't like you looking too good,
Yeah.
and they want to bring you down a notch. And
Mhm.
so, you know, reminding folks of the humanity across the board, and you get to be who you want to be, and who you are is not the problem.
Mhm.
Sin is the problem. Um,
Mhm.
and then again, it's okay. It's not just okay, like it's necessary to take those breaks.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
we would say if Jesus took a break and things kept moving, we could probably
Mhm.
take some too. But you know,
Yeah.
it's tempting in this work to feel like it's too serious to take a break, or if I take a break, like that means I wasn't strong enough to keep going.
Mhm.
But again, we see in the life that is lived out for us in the scripture that you've got to take those breaks. Sometimes you got to turn the media off.
Mhm.
You gotta stay off of Facebook for the afternoon. You got to ignore the alerts. Strategically, you know, you might have to have somebody who can get through to you when you say, okay, it's time to wake back up.
Yeah.
um,
I
and
think
folks,
you've got to have that accountability partner, both who pulls you in and pulls you out. I'm blessed. As you well know, one of my closest friends, Dr. Wayne Davis, down in Cincinnati at the Bethel Baptist Church, just recently retired. But
mm,
Wayne is a PhD as a Black male in male grief. And he has been a tremendous help to me personally, and even to men in our congregation, to help us begin to walk through those pressure points. Because you're right, we usually haven't been given permission to grieve or to show our pain and transparency and those kinds of things. And so I think everybody's got to find somebody
mm,
that can hold them accountable on the mental health side. You know, sometimes I call him, the conversation is as friend and brother. Other times we talk, I'm like, look, I need you to be my mental health professional, because
yeah,
I need you to walk me through what I'm dealing with, whatever. And I'm blessed with that. But I'm saying that I don't care who you are, every counselor needs a counselor. And you need somebody who can be real with you and read your rights to you out of a loving way. And you may not want to hear it, but in your quiet moments, you know, this is the person who really cared about me because they were honest with me.
yeah, yeah. That's good. Any last minute or parting words to our dear congregation and brothers and sisters in the community?
Well, again, I certainly am blessed to realize just how much I love this New Salem family. Many of you have been asking, when are we coming back to in-person service? I will announce to you today, not yet. We are going to wait till we feel comfortable with making sure the environment is safe for all of us. As I said to somebody, the church is not closed, the building is closed. And so we continue to do ministry in terms of those kinds of things. We've seen productivity in ways we never dreamed of it before, with staff and with myself. So I want to encourage you, take time to check on people. You know, I've had conversations with members. We've had several folks who've lost loved ones or whatever case may be. Just know that Sister Troy and I really do miss y'all. We were teasing each other. I don't know what people who had lived together have done if they don't like each other. Thank God my wife puts up with me in terms of that. We were laughing the other day about how long this thing has lasted. Nobody saw this coming. If there's an issue of loneliness or whatever, reach out to somebody else. Sometimes I think you take the focus off yourself and you become the person who pours into somebody else. It's amazing what happens, how that takes the emphasis off you, or you're feeling of depression or isolation, whatever it is. Take the initiation in terms of those kind of things. But I want you guys to have a great day and a great week. Thank Brother Landon Adams for doing father. He finally got some help in his household. He finally has a male child in that household.
Yeah.
But I already told them that Alice and Annie gonna be running that. So y'all pray for his son because he's gonna get placed over and over again.
Yes, sir. Well, Pastor, as always, we appreciate you. You have never been a pastor to shy away from your people. And, you know, just to come on again, when we talked about this series, we talked about how important it was for folks to be able to take what was true in their lives and talk with the scriptures and our faith. And I think particularly in this week, in this time, this has been a good time to be able to hear from you, for us to be reminded, you know, whatever ways you engage with the work, just engage with the work.
Yeah.
The only thing we don't like is folks not doing something. And so if you are on the front lines, you know, we are praying for your safety, your courage, your conviction. If you are writing checks to support people, supplies for the movement, if you will. If you're just calling to encourage people, if you're cooking a meal for somebody, checking on somebody, if you're sharing posts on Facebook, if you're having conversations with the people in your circle about why this is important, write to your elected officials. Let them know what you're not happy about, what you would like to see changed. That's the way we hold folks accountable, the folks who have come to our very congregation when running for office.
Exactly right.
Tell them, I remember when you came and you committed to doing what was right and helping the community, and this is why we need some help. If you need some suggestions or need to know where to plug in, you let us know at the church. Your staff is surely not off. Church is not closed.
Y'all knew who y'all work for. Y'all not surprised.
But I mean, as you said, this is an exciting time for us to think about. You know, we love to talk about the scriptures like, behold, all things are new. But new can be kind of scary. New can be exhausting. But we're excited about the ways in which we know God is still working. God is still moving. God is still calling us to be relevant, to be salt and light in the world. So we just encourage both our members of New Salem Church and all of you across the country and world who might be listening to us. You know, just be encouraged. We are reminded that God is going to be with us. It might not be easy, but we're going to keep our hand to the plow. Yeah. Again, thanks for being.
Remember, it's a great day to be alive.
Indeed. Alive and free.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks again for joining us for this Theology Thursday. If you don't have a church home or want another worship service, we are here on YouTube live on Sunday mornings at 11. We'd love to have you join us for our corporate worship. All right. We'll see you again next week. Thanks so much and God bless.
Thank you, bro.